In this video I wanted to go over a few different things. To start, I just wanted to, we left off with our pocketing operation. We didn't assign the inside and outside profiles for that, so I wanted to show you how I would do that quickly. I also wanted to show you how to what might happen if things get moved around, how to regenerate if you move, regenerate the whole setup if you move parts, and also to how to simulate the cutting here. To get started, I have everything on my pocket layer. I do not have sub-layers to identify which parts of these pockets are areas that we would need to cut, or islands that we need to cut on the outside of those islands, and which parts are curves that we'd cut on the inside. So I'm stuck here. I have to manually select those. But I can save time if I go to my inside cut operation that I have up here. What I can do is if I select the folder, so I want to make sure that I'm clicking on the folder, that will highlight the operation blue. If I Control C, Control V, that will paste a new copy of that inside profiling, and I can drag this up underneath my pocketing, and if I double click this copy of the inside profiling, I want to change the curves from these curves to my the outside lines of my text that I want to cut on the inside, clean up that inside edge. To do that, I'll click Remove All here, and then select Curve Edge Regions, and now I can select these lines that I want to cut on the inside of. And I'm using a 1/4 inch tool, which is the same tool that I used to do my pocketing, so I can keep that the same. But what I need to adjust are the levels. Right now, the original profiling was set to cut all the way through the material, but my pocketing only goes down, I think it was 1/4 inch. So in that case, I want to change my total depth to 0.25. And here, since I'm using the same tool size, the pocketing has already cleared most of the material. So in this case, I don't have to worry about cutting the radius of the tool at a time. I can actually cut all the way to the bottom, because I'm only removing that 0.025 of stock that the pocketing left behind. So I can cut this all at once. Under Entry Exit now, I do want to update that. In this case, we're not removing a lot of material, so I could set the Entry Exit either to none, or I can update the along path value so that it's matching the full height. And so I usually like to keep the along path value there if it makes sense to. So I'll just update that. Also, in the previous profiling, inside profiling, we were cutting these shapes out, and so we had a tab at the bottom, but in this case we don't want a tab at the bottom of these cleanup passes, so I'll say none over here, and then I'll click Generate, and so we get a nice inside cleanup pass. And so now if I want to do that same thing on the inside of these islands here, I can Control C, Control V, then I can double click this, remove all, and select just the island curves, hit enter, And now if I change cut parameters to outside, that's the only setting that I need to change. All the other settings can stay the same. And I'll get a nice cleanup curve around the outside of those islands. So that should complete my program. One other thing that I would look at here is the sort of the organization and the timeline so each time the machine switches tools, it adds time. So if I can group any of these operations together so that I'm changing tools less frequently, that will help me save time. So if I come through here and I look, I have my pocketing operation and the profiling cleanup for that pocketing. Those are all with a 1/4 inch tool. I then have my 1/8 inch tool doing the engraving, and then I come back here, I have my 1/4 inch tool doing the inside profiles. All of these things are internal to the parts, so it would save me a little time if I just so I'm going to click the folder again and drag it up. So that way I keep my 1/4 inch tool and I don't put it back until I absolutely have used it for everything that I need to. So I start with my tool 1, my drill. I have my tool 2 do everything that it needs to do. Then I go to my tool 3 to do my engraving, and then my last tool, tool 4, I'm cutting out the parts. And so that way the setup is as efficient as possible. I'd also like to go over how to use the simulation up here. If you remember at the beginning, I went over, I have this layer here for my plywood. I'm going to turn that layer on, and again, this is a box that is 48 by 96 by 0.75 inches. If I select this box and I come over here to stock and go down to stock from selection, you can see that there's this new sort of orange hue behind the plywood object, and if I turn that layer off, you can see that orange stays there. And so that's the stock object in RhinoCAM. So now if I go over to the Simulate tab and I go here to play. Oh, sorry. So if what I want to do first is right click this setup. So I'm going to first select the setup, then right click it and say simulate. And that's going to give us our simulation. And so now we can see a preview of the actual cut geometry. And so what we can use the simulation, sometimes it can be a little bit glitchy, but it's pretty helpful for us to look at potential errors in the program. And so in this case, I see these letters are starting to touch. If I go back to the Program tab, let's say that I wanted to maybe move these letters a little bit further apart. When I move these, you'll see that the engraving folder here has this little flower or little explosion, that's saying that some of the geometry has moved. Some of the geometry that's associated with that operation has moved. The other thing I can see in the simulation is, so if I click the bottom here, there's not a lot of material left on the side of the sheet where this tab is going to hold on to. So if I go back to program, if I want to sort of move everything over maybe 1/4 of an inch, that's going to throw everything off. So to quickly regenerate everything, I can select the setup, right click the setup, and go to regenerate here at the top. And now with that done, I can simulate again, and that will give me a new simulation. And now I can see that that looks a bit better. I like those results a little better. And one thing I wanted to show you, just to try to make it a little more clear, is if we look at the pocketing simulation, you can see from the initial pocketing simulation to the cleanup, you can see that that opening actually gets bigger. So that's showing you that 0.025 stock value. That's what we're removing when we do that cleanup pass. You can also see that the curves, because of the offset pattern of the pocketing, the lines aren't very clean. And when we do the cleanup, it makes those a little bit cleaner. Especially, you can see some of this on these islands. They're really not clean. But when we come in and do that cleanup pass for the island, it really makes things look much sharper. So the cleanup passes on the pocketing are really important. You can also notice that in the simulation tabs, I click down through these, it shows you step by step the rest of the parts. So if I want to see everything, I have to click on the very last operation. So that covers adding in the cleanup, some more tips on how to regenerate things, and also running the simulation. Thanks.